Tom Donney here in Fort Dodge. We're going to look at Saab carburetors today. Specifically, we're going to look at the three-cylinder triple carbs. No single carbs today, just triples. And what I want to go over, a couple things real quick. You can get gaskets for these carbs now. David Bauer sells gaskets. He has a lot of good stuff. And David's email address is davidlbauer@yahoo.com. But he sells new gaskets. There's also some made in, I think, Uruguay or something like that, and they're junk. So stay away from those. They don't match. Another thing I wanted to show you quick is jets. The jets on these, I don't know if you can see the hole size difference there. One has a really big hole, one's a small hole. And Saab, this is the early design with the small hole. They went to a later. So if you get these small hole ones, there's 3 of them on there. Drill those out, and we'll drill those out to 3/32 of an inch. Real simple, easy to do. Remove the little jet. This is your main carrier. Remove the main jet from the main carrier, and away you go. And then if you need jets, I carry all sizes, but there's a guy on eBay, and his username is Alpha1750. He sells jet. He's in Italy. Great guy. Really highly recommend getting stuff from him. It's amazing. I'll order stuff from him. I'll have them in 2-3 days. I don't know how the hell they come so quick, but they do. So, and here's a sample of a bad gasket. This was off of a GT carb, and you can see where the carbon had been sucking through. I've only seen a few of these bad, but they'll really throw you for a loop trying to diagnose them. So I think it's a good idea to separate them there and replace that gasket. This other gasket in here, you know, I just rarely ever take them apart. That's the square gasket. You know, you've got and really there's only, for carb rebuilding, these things are pretty simple. There's only 9 gaskets. You've got the 3 here, the 3 on top, and then of course your main gasket. But David sells all those stuff. You do have to be careful on gaskets. There are 2 designs for the manifolds. You've got your early carburetor design, which is right here. And that has the adjusting screw on the base for your idle mixture. That's an easy way to tell it's on the manifold. And it'll take a big gasket. And then you have the small gasket, which is your later 66 and up. And either one will fit just fine on your block. If you put this gasket on this carburetor, you will melt pistons. If you don't believe me, call Bruce Turk. So real important to keep an eye on that, because some kits only include this later gasket, so be careful of that. I know Dave now is putting the older gasket in there for everybody to avoid that issue. But the other thing I want to look at is manifold numbers, I should say. This is the first triple carb they ever used. It's a 71, 79, 21, used on the 63, 64 GTs. And these have all been flat sanded. I normally don't even use a gasket. I use a gasket maker. It's a red, I forget the name of it right now. I'll remember it as we go. But I use that instead of that. Silicone, no, don't use silicone. But this is the early style. It's takes the big fat gasket. And then the next style they went with is a 73 1098. And this is a 65 only. I call it the early Monte Carlo series. Again, it takes the big gasket. It's got the big plate. They have the adjustment screw for the air mixture right on the manifold itself. That's a dead giveaway. You got to have the big gasket. And then we go to the later style Monte Carlo, which is 66 and up. That's a 73 24 17. No mixture screw, and it's a smaller area. So it takes the small gasket. And one thing I should mention on these, on this 71, 79, 21 on these GT, the early GTs, those are 3 independent throttle bodies. So you adjust those all independent. And these also, the Monte Carlos, have a shorter intake tract. It's about 4 inches if you measure from the throttle plate to the end of the manifold. And that's on all the Monte Carlos, about 4 inches in measurement. The later non-Monte Carlo, these are really common. This is the 73 2007. That's a real common one, and it has a longer intake track. It's about a 5/8 of an inch longer. As a rule, a longer track will give you better low-end torque. A shorter track will give you a little bit better high-end performance. And so you can intermix manifolds a bit there and play with it. It'll really be dependent too upon your exhaust chamber that you have. All that stuff ties in together in some form of witchcraft, which I barely understand any of it. But those are your 4 different manifolds and carburation combinations that you have. I have seen a few where they'll put the manifold with the adjustment screw on it, and then they'll put a carburetor that has the adjustment screw on it, and it makes kind of a morphodite. So if you see that, someone's been playing. Someone wanted to put a shorter intake manifold on, and that's fine. You can do that if you want. The last thing I want to cover here is carburetor rebuild. Rebuilding of carburetors on these is really pretty simple. The throttle shafts wear out real bad on the single carbs, but you don't see much of that on the triple. Really all you have to do is take all the jets out. And here this is all the jets taken out of this carburetor. And you can do this right on the vehicle. I do it all the time on the vehicle. If I've got an old vehicle that hasn't ran, and we fired one up the other day, hadn't ran in over 20 years. Pull the tops off, pull your jets out, take your idle mixture screw, your low speeds, your high mid-range, whatever the hell they are, the ones on the side here, take them off. I've got a little tool here, somewhere if I can find it. It's a little screwdriver kit that Sears used to sell, and it's fantastic for getting in here and getting these impossible to get bolts. Here's the part number of it. It was a Sears 941 469. I'm sure there's other makers that make something like this, but it's a ratchet screwdriver, and man, you can get in there and get those difficult. You've got two that are a pain in the ass to get out, because when you get in here, that's really difficult to get in with anything but something like this, and that makes it available nice and easy. On these manifolds, another easy way to tell them, as long as we've got them sitting here and easy to tell, the GTs have a square side, removable side plate right here. That's your GT, your 71, 79, 21. And then your early Monte Carlos have a pentagon shaped, a 5-sided cover that comes off. And that's your 73, 1098. Your later ones, they don't even have removable covers. You can see here, no removable cover on the 73, 2007, and no removable cover here on the 73, 2417. But to overhaul this carburetor, you can pull your emission tubes out. Those go in here. I use a pair of pliers, almost like grabbing a tooth out. And all you gotta do is reach in here and pull on them. You just reach down in here, give it a little twist and a tug. It's just like pulling a tooth. She'll pop right out. I know some of you go, what the hell, I've never pulled a tooth in my life. When you put them back in, line them up, there's a little notch, and just tap them in place. Pretty easy to do. There's also a little tube inside of here. You want to take that out and clean it. A lot of times they'll be all garbaged up. And the early GTs had 2 holes rather than 4. They had the spots for the holes every 90 degrees, but they weren't actually drilled. So a GT would have 4 places for holes, but they're only drilled across from one another 180 degrees. It's a quick way to tell them. Another thing that happens with these is where you screw these in, these jets will fall out, so always reach in with the screwdriver and make sure they're tight. But don't get them too tight, because what you'll do is you'll snap this emulsion tube in half. No big deal if it's the later one, but the GTs are like hen teeth, hard to come by. Alpha 1750 does have those new in stock, so you can get them from him. But if you take all these jets out, there's a little screen inside here. I know that Saab had updates where they told you to throw that screen away, but I usually put them in if I got them. Figure it's one more little thing to save, unless it's a race app, and I don't. But if you pull all your jets out, take and blow air through it. If you got some corrosion and crud, take it off. If you want to check your gasket here, that's easy enough to do. Then you might want to pull the carbs off, because these bolts can be difficult to get on the engine. But if you're doing a poor man's quick rebuild, you can do that real easy on the vehicle. Take everything out, blow it all good clean. Take your jets and clean them all up real good. You can get some carb spray at the local parts store and squirt in there. Works real nice. Your air mixture screw, almost all of these I'll run them in until they just touch. You don't want to go too hard or you'll break it or bend it. And then back it out. 2 turns is usually a good starting point, 2 complete revolutions. Anywhere from 2 to 3 seems to idle real nice. So if you do all that, you'll normally have a pretty good working carb. You can take this cold start valve apart on any of them. Normally you don't need to unless they're really crusty and rusty. Nothing hidden in there. There is one more jet carrier you can take out once you get that out. But other than that, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But you really don't have to, in a lot of cases, don't have to take them apart and soak them like you would on say a regular carburetor. And there's no accelerator pump, So there's nothing there to replace. These are purely downdraft only. There's a Venturi, and I know XP Power sells bigger, in Sweden sells bigger Venturis. A little screw right here is what you use. If you loosen this screw up, it's just a pinch fit on the Venturi and it'll pop out of there. But really, if you get all this stuff out of here, take it apart, blow it out good and clean it, put it all back together, be sure you've got a fuel filter in the system. They're pretty easy, pretty trouble-free carbs. I use GTs on one of my drivers. They work fine. You do have to adjust the GTs independently because you do have the independent idle, and you got to do it with a flow meter. The common throttle ones are probably easier to mess with, and one idle setting on those. So that's about it. I've got other videos on how to kind of hold your hand over and clean the top of a carb, and how to actually take the top of the carbs off using that little tool I just showed you. But for the most part, that's about it. All I wanted to show here today. So keep your Saab running by keeping your carbs clean, and you can use, these are the jets we talk about, getting bigger sizes. I carry an assortment right here, about every size known to man. And then if I'm racing or just driving, I'll carry an assortment in a little baggie and go from there. So that's about all I have for today. This is Tom Donney in Fort Dodge, Iowa, signing off.